Good morning. Hope you guys are enjoying the conference. This is the talk on Road to High Availability Begins with the Database. I'm Pieter Meyer. I've been with MRP Holdings for over 25 years. We're a Progress first company as well. I'm currently the head of DevOps there, responsible for all the technical operation standards in the company as well, and making sure everything flows smoothly within the systems as well. I've been working with Progress itself for more than 30 years at this stage already, and I've got a knowledge across various of the Progress products, okay, and my expertise has spanned across everything from development down to DBA as well. Okay. So just a quick going over the agenda. We'll give you a quick overview, telling about MRP and where we started with this and why I decided to go onto this topic today. And then we'll just go quickly through the high-level topics of high availability. Okay. So the ultimate goal for your system is to be up 24/7, really. You want to have your application and your databases available to the end users as much as possible. And at the core of that is really your data. You can come in from all different the directions of the information on the application side and the routes, but the core always comes back to the database. And the high availability in Progress is not standard out of the box. They give you the tools and the products, but you need to actually go and build it into your application. You still need to understand how you're actually going to put that in and what is the best solution that works for your implementation. Okay. The replication that OpenEdge gives to us is there to help us to get to zero loss scenarios. It is up to a few seconds if you configure it correctly and you have the correct infrastructure in place to actually allow you to get your data as near to loss as possible in the scenario of a disaster. Okay. But with the replication and some of the high availability options, you also need to always make sure that you are always connecting to the correct database, the active database, and the correct updatable database. And I'll go through a few scenarios later on to explain why I'm actually saying there's three different options of what the database state could be when you're trying to connect to it as well. Okay. And this session really is just to show you a high level of what replication is, what our challenges were, and what we did to sort of try and achieve it, and how we decided on what level we implemented in some of our implementations. Okay. The biggest components that we'll talk to in this session will be about the OE replication as well as the replication sets, what the difference between the two is. We'll talk about alternative database connections and if there's any other questions or things you want to bring up. And just keeping in mind that all the database features that you have on there, if there's any impact of those into the database and the replication, setting those things up. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on now to the introduction of MRP. Not here to sell or tell anything too much about MRP. It's really to give you the understanding of where we came about trying to get our high availability implemented. Currently, we've got over 600 people in the company alone, of which more than 500 is OpenEdge developers. So it's quite a big group we have. We got more than 22 million beneficiaries contracts on the systems that we run across. So and any of those could be users that could access your systems. So to try and make sure all of those systems are always 24/7 available, you actually need to start making sure you get proper high availability solutions in place. Okay. We've got various divisions across various industries, and therefore this solution is not bound to a single implementation. It works across the board for any type of industry. So even for your scenarios, you can actually look and see if it will actually be a suitable solution. Okay. And then the same is, even with all those industries, when it comes down to our tech ops and DevOps, we've tried to centralize that, and that looks over more than 1,000 databases across 70 customers, that we actually try and make sure all of these solutions, especially the production systems, is always as 24/7 available as possible. And we've got customers primarily in Africa, as well as a few across the rest of the world as well. So it's not just globally bound to a local area, it is actually worldwide that these solutions implemented as well. And then it's not just in-house, we've also got outsourced, where we actually do go and assist other customers and other companies with actually getting their solutions in place, even if it's just a consulting or a resource outsourcing that we do. So it's quite a broad view that we took to actually make sure that when we implement it, it actually works for everyone. It's not dedicated purely to what we do and how we work. Okay. When we come to disaster recovery, the basic concept is people always just think you need to have 24/7. They don't always understand even what disaster recovery is. The disaster recovery has all these different tiers, and when you actually start showing people this image, then they actually don't even realize what they are doing or not doing. When you talk literally from tier 0 to tier 3, those are purely just saying is that you are risk of actually losing your systems. Okay? Do you actually have backups in place? Do you have backups that actually at least gets taken off site? Do you keep that available that you can restore? We trying to say is we really want to work between tier 4 and 6 with a customer, depending on what options and resources the customer can add to the implementation, is where you want to start to get as more real time as possible to saying is there's always option of quickly recovering from anything that goes wrong. Okay, and that's why we prefer from tier 4 upwards to tier 6. Tier 7 is one of those where you really need to fully understand what you're doing. And that's where you fully automate replication, transitioning and stuff. And that thing is, we don't want a system to decide at certain points just to quickly switch, because there's scenarios where your network drops for a second and now the system that takes over. So we prefer to stop at level 6 to saying is we will make that final decision if a disaster happens, if we will throw the switch. We build enough monitoring and DevOps components in that we get warnings to the second if anything goes wrong, that we can rather have someone make that final decision. You might get some of the big bangs or some of the scenarios where if you implement it and script it properly, you can look at levels tier 7. But you really, really need to be there on top of that. The last thing you want to have is that 2 systems actually tries to be primary. Okay. But with these tiers that you actually now get, each tier comes with a recovery time and a cost associated. And that's the biggest challenge that we normally have going to customers to saying is, which of these tiers are we going to implement for you? From MRP standard, we start with tier 4 immediately going up. We actually do not do anything below that. And we always need to make sure that there's a solution in place that we can get them up and running as soon as possible. The fact that the customer some days doesn't want to spend the money to try and put more resources in place, in the end, it's going to cost you and the extra time and effort you need to spend for working for 3-4 days to try and get it up, compared to the cost the customer could have saved by actually just putting that correct infrastructure in place. Okay. But like I said, yeah. So you want to try and get as close to tier 7 as you can, and tier 7 you need to make that final decision if you want to automate some of the processes. Okay. Load balancing, that is a topic on its own, which I actually don't want to try and even get into, because depending on the industry, the customers, the scenarios you have, some people can have no load balancing in place, or they can overcomplicate it to an extent that you actually can't some days understand where the system or where the information or connections comes in, where they have the web servers are load balanced, the proxies are load balanced, the pairs are, they might set up multiples. Even when you want to debug issues, to try and find out all those chains of load balancing between has its own challenges. But yeah, those are normally dictated by the organizations in the industries. So I'm not even going to go into that. Like I said, that could be a topic on its own. We've had quite a few interesting scenarios, but even with all the load balancing, you come still back to one single data source at the end. Okay, and that's where we want to make sure is that data source, depending whatever the roads that comes into your system, that we make sure that is always as available as possible to the 24/7 scenario up to the second. Okay, like I say, all roads lead to Rome, and we're going to focus pure on the Rome side. We're not going to try and focus today on all the roads that comes in there. Okay, so let's switch over or move on to the high availability components. Starting on the first tier is where you actually have backups. And it's quite interesting to, when you talk to certain customers or people, that they've got a database and they might do a backup, but that's where they stop. Do you actually have this as a minimum in place? And then from this, do you at least have something where you are storing your backups off-site? Do you have vaulting in place? Okay. A lot of customers, I've got it, I copy into another machine. Still in the same data center, still in the same office. Are you actually creating a proper off-site backup, a vaulting of your database? Okay. You need to make sure you've got that in place. And then with that, are you restoring those backups as well and verifying those backups at various points in times? It's great having backups, but if you can't confirm that backups is valid and you can use it, then you're still at risk. You need to do certain test restores of those backups as well. And it doesn't need to be a proper DR scenario testing. You can just restore it to a non-prod, or we've got scenarios where we use a day one, where any queries we do is we actually have a database every night that gets backed up, and it gets restored there as well, and we can do any queries on that database without having to work on the production database. And that daily backup restore, we verify that that backup is in place. Okay? And then moving the step forward is, have you at least AI enabled on your database? Okay? Which will therefore extract all your processing as it happens, and it will actually dump those AI after image nodes out for you. And you can even roll those forward if you're actually working on something like a tier 4 where you don't have a real-time replicated database available. But these are really on the tier 4 and 5 scenarios that what of this do you have in place? And if you haven't, start at least with this. This is the minimum that you need to get to the road of actually being protected for any disaster occurring. Okay? And that's your first step to high availability. Moving on to replication. And yes, replication is an additional license on OpenEdge, but it is worth putting this into your system. It's worth adding it to your applications. Okay? It removes a lot of the manual processing that you need to do on managing the after image and those files, letting Progress and its agents actually manage it automatically for you. Okay, so the OpenEdge application allows you to take your primary database and send the information to one or two secondary databases. Okay, and therefore you can actually get copies of it, and preferably to two or different. One or more different servers, and also preferably to different data centers. It doesn't help you have two servers in the same server on the same host and hope to make that your DR and both your main host goes down and you lose both servers. You need to make sure that you have different infrastructures in place for this. Okay. And yeah, the replicated database then allows you that hot standby. But the hot standby is actually a bit more. With the OpenEdge replication, it's not hot standby like you would have just with standard AI and AI roll forward. It's actually an advanced read-only database. You can fully access, not process, but you can fully query that database in conjunction with your live database as well. Okay. And whenever your live database fails, you can literally switch over to a replicated database within a few seconds. Okay? Our standard failovers we can do within 2 minutes on a controlled thing, and a customer can be up and running on the alternative systems within 2 minutes if you actually do it right. Okay? And it's very simple. It's not a long, big process to do. Very easy to implement as well. Okay, your database features that you have will work across replication as well. All you need to do is that for the TDE, the database auditing, hardening, or CDC, add those extents on. Make sure, and wherever you configure it, just configure it on your source database, and it will actually replicate across to your target database as well. Okay, so as soon as you build your initial target database, all of those functionality will come across. Okay, and if you don't have at least the TDE, the database auditing, and the hardening enabled, that's one of the other database features you really need to look at. That's the way that you're going to protect your system. From a security aspect as well, where the replication makes sure that you've got copies of it, but you still need to make sure you lock down your database. And those are key features that if you don't have that, please investigate and get moving on those as well. Okay. So replication is literally, there is two scenarios that Progress offers. The standard replication where you actually can literally just have one target, or you can actually do to two targets. Before, the two targets were two independent targets, but they've actually enhanced it, and it's now a set where you can actually get some communication between all three. Okay, and I'll touch a bit more on that as well. So the source database will replicate to both targets, and between them they have an interconnect to also make sure that they're all up to date. Okay, and you can rotate across the databases as you need when you transition. Okay, but you also need to be aware when you transition and how you transition, and we'll go a bit into that. But yeah, the single replication is very straightforward. It's just literally switching between the two if you do. But when you get to the replication set, you do need to understand the sequence in what you work as well. Okay, and so far we've only really had 2 customers who ever looked at replication sets, because with each of these things, you actually get some more considerations. It's like every replication you introduce, you need to introduce a new server or a new infrastructure. And that comes with its own components as well, the memory, CPU, the disks, as well as the network. Okay? For the replicated database or the replicated servers, the only thing that really needs to match is your disk space. Okay? And you need to have a thorough network throughput to those. Your CPU and your memory, you can reduce to the minimal just to make sure the service and the services are running, okay? And only when you have a DR, you really want to bring them up, you can bring that up. So you can save cost if you need to by running on minimal memory and CPU until that server becomes a primary or active database, okay? And when you start using both databases, and I'll show you in the next slide, when you start using those databases, you actually want to try and get your servers as close as possible together as well, because then you actually can offload some of your processing across both systems. So apart from replication being there's high availability, it also has got the ability to go and spread your load. Okay? Simple implementation we've done is we've got our source database, we only allow 4GL connections. Only the ABL connections are allowed there. Only our applications connects there. We've actually, on the replicated database, we set up the 4GL and SQL only on there. And any SQL, data warehouse, any queries that people want to do extracting data, we've offload to that server. So there's no bad SQL queries, no bad processing, or third parties getting their fingers onto the production database. So by using the replication, you can even actually spread the load and your resources. Okay? And these servers can be in a similar data center if you want, or like I said, across data centers. One of the customers, we've got the one database which they refer to as the reporting replication is sitting in the same data center as the production, but the real DR one is actually sitting in a separate data center. Okay? So they actually span it across different things. And therefore, you're offloading it, and especially everyone who wants to do their fingers in with the data warehousing, that you can actually offload it. Okay, and that actually takes off a tremendous load of network connection and traffic of your production that you can manage and make sure your applications are up and running 100% there. Okay, and taking this scenario, one of our big customers purely running a single replication, they actually have their 2 data centers are setting up exactly as each other, and every 6 months they transition over. So for 6 months they run on the one data center, the next 6 months on the other data center. And everything is properly configured in the back end with all their load balancing and their DNSs, that all the connections goes via proper DNS or floating IPs, and they literally just have to switch those on the firewalls and everything else will work. We literally do a transition in 2 minutes, and their downtime is 15 minutes to half an hour for them to do all the other double checks, but it's a controlled failover. But every 6 months they switch over. And with that, you can then do maintenance on your DR environment as well, which you don't try and keep down as much or too long, but it allows them some time slot to saying is they're going to shut down that server, do a patch and bring it up because it's a DR, and the replication will just catch up again. Okay, so it allows them to maintain both systems in a very much real-time scenario. Okay, with as minimal downtime on the actual main production as what they need. Okay. The other big benefit of when you start running replication is you got multiple copies of your systems. Okay, it's not the initial one where you just have a backup and you're keeping it offsite. We currently on our replicated environments we do a backup on the source database. Okay. We restore it to the test and the non-prod environments where we test daily that as well, and that's one of the databases I use to query, okay, to make sure that if any queries comes in from the customer that we need to look at, we always look at that offline of the production, so that we don't touch the real production. But we've tested the restore there. We've done that. AI files is still enabled and you running part of the replication, okay, and we're also keeping those as backups. Because with AI, you can also roll forward up to a certain point in time. It's not just pure to saying it's that snapshot. With every backup you've done, all the subsequent AIs can be incrementally rolled forward to a specific date and time as well, which has its second version of backup or recovery components. Then even when we're now sitting on the target database, which is advanced read-only, we also do a backup there, which is in a different data center, and it's from there, we're also doing its own vaulting. Okay, so you've got a third copy of your backup really. Plus, for DR testing, okay, instead of just saying you need to do a DR test every 6 months, which therefore means you need to break replication, switch your whole DR site to an active site and work on it, we actually restore that backup we do to a DR test environment every day as well. Firstly, testing that backup. It works. Plus, you can have a test DNS record for the DR. And every morning, you can actually have someone that logs in and says, I'm going to go check transactions from yesterday there. And they can actually work and process on that and test. And you can do ad hoc DR test continuously versus to saying is you only do it once every 6 months. So you can actually have in departments to saying is every week one of your users actually have to log into DR. Firstly, it trains the users as well to saying is, if a DR happens, I log in here and this is where I go. But instead of test DR, I just click the DR link. But they at least also on a continuous training for the users, they know how to switch to DR. Plus you verify your DR backups is running because they're verifying transactions maybe of the last day or two that they processed in production. So it's a whole verification and making sure that you have your data and your high availability in place. And even your users are trained and ready for any switchovers. Coming to replication sets. Replication sets is you can now specify from each database, which when that database is primary, what the second and the third database it connects to. Okay, and like I said, the previous arrays you saw, the target always sends to both sources and there's interconnect. But just for this exercise, I'm showing you that from the green here, I can actually go down to the blue and then I can go to the orange if it can't connect to the blue. So this configuration for replication set is set up per database independently. So I can let the green decide which is its first and second connection. The same as on the blue, I set up separately what is its connection. going, what's its first and second connection? If it had to transition, what is the cycle that I go on? Okay, so those are configured per set. Okay, and it's not a big change in the replication property files for each database. We just go and make sure both agents are configured, and you just actually give it the sequence in which it transitions. Okay. But like I said, that is set up per individual database. And it can be unstructured, okay, where you can actually say, okay, my blue is always going to green to orange, and the orange is going always to green to blue. But only when you really get to green, you actually need to choose the different things. So it doesn't mean it's going to be a triangular cycle. Each DB individually gets. And that's one of the key things you need to keep in mind when you set up your replication sets, that if you're going to choose a route, make sure how you implement it, okay? And understand why you're implementing it, because the one service may be just a secondary failover and much less spec than some of the other servers that you're running. And it could be that you always want to use those two primaries, and this is really your third failover server in case something really goes wrong. Okay. Or if you have a reporting server and you don't want to use it as a primary replication. So replication sets, be careful when you set it up that you don't actually do some misconfiguration and later not understanding why it doesn't fit together. Okay. Okay, so now we're going over to alternate database connections. Okay. So the alternate database connections is a nice new feature that they added. So saying is, now I can actually, on the client side, also actually saying is, let's connect to more than one database if my one database goes down, okay? The only shortfall right now is the replication and the alternate database connections don't really talk to each other. It's two independent components that you need to manage independently as well, okay? And I'll give you a few examples of that. So, and really all it is you're actually adding a few additional startup parameters in your connection string now. And it only works for the client-server connections. It doesn't work for shared connections. So it's only if you do across the client connections there. Okay. So there's literally just 5 or 6 additional connection parameters to do. The -CT to saying is how many retries do I need to try on this database before I move on to the next database in that list. Okay, and then you specify what the first alternative database is, the second alternative, and also what the number of retries is connecting to the DBs before it gives up connecting. Okay, and then the retry connect pause is how long. So when I go through the cycle, how long do I pause before I actually retry the cycle? Okay. And then the last one is the auto reconnect, which is really what enables the feature to saying is, when I lose connection on my primary database, do I auto reconnect to the second databases? Do I go through connecting to the alternate databases? Okay. So for the GUI and the character mode, you're setting up in the connect PF. Okay. And when you add replication or your users feature, when you have a replicated database, it will only add the target database into the alternative connection list as well. Okay, so that's the only interaction between the replication and alternate DB connections. Okay. And like I said, simple in your connection, or where you normally have your connection to your database, you just now add the alternate 1 and 2 connections in there, and saying what your timeout and periods are, and then you auto reconnect. Okay, and it will then follow that chain. So when the first database goes down, it will then move on and trying to connect to your second database, and so forth. Okay. So if you have both of these features enabled and using it, and you get a crash on your source database, you now transition, or if you have auto transitioning on, it moves on to your secondary database, your target database. Great. Your alternative connection also therefore goes and connects to your first alternative database. Great. So your replication fell over, you've got the new source database running, and your client connection connect to the source. Perfect. Real world scenario, everything works. Okay? And that is where you can say, okay, I've got high availability working, okay, which works fine until you actually then start looking. Sorry, why is this not trying to reboot my server? Okay. So when you start getting replication sets, and that's why it says, when you configure it, as you can see here, if my replication, if it crashes, I can move over to my next database. But if I went and configured my alternative DB connections in a different sequence, okay, you can be connecting to a different database. Okay, your alternate DB doesn't follow the source database; it follows the list of connections that it's set up. Okay, so when you do set up your transitioning or your database replication and your alternative DB connections, make sure you align those. Okay. Because you want to make sure you go to the right database. And that's why you need to be very careful if you start using sets and you're using those sequences on which database to connect to. Because it will connect to that database. It might give an error saying, okay, it's a read-only database you're trying to update, it's not going to work. But it's not going to fail on the connection state. It's connected and it's there. Your application might stop working, and for you to actually fix it, you need to then anyway log out and start up with the correct connection string then again. Okay, so be careful when you set that up. The next scenario is, let's say I've got my DBs in the right sequence, properly set up. But if I do a controlled failover, which database is the alternate DB going to connect to? Will it connect to the source again, or will it connect to the target? I might fall over to the blue database saying that's my new source. Depending on the time the failover happens, the timeout on the auto reconnect could actually still reconnect by the time the database is already transitioned and back up and running, and therefore doesn't fail over. So it can reconnect back to the green database when you've now actually transitioned to source, to the blue database. Okay, so, but if you are down long enough, it can then say, let's try the blue, and at that time your transition is complete and the blue is up, it will then connect to the blue. So the sequence of transitioning and the auto reconnect, depending on how your sequence and timeouts are set up and how long the transitioning takes, actually can make that your auto reconnect connects to the right database or not, which is one of the things you do need to keep in mind. And then it also comes down to is, let's say you were already now on the blue and you transition again to the next one, but you're still running on the green database and the DB Connect. What will happen? Nothing, because this database is not going down. It doesn't reconnect anywhere else. It will still read here. You're actually just moving your source now to the orange database. If this alternate DB Connect is purely a simple query that just extracts data, it doesn't really matter because it can extract it from anywhere. But if that is a client connection that does updates, you want to make sure your database follows it. Okay? And that's one of the features I hope Progress will still solve us, to help us that the client connection does also at least have some intelligence to follow the source database when it happens. Because right now that is not supported there yet. Okay. Okay, so like I said, replication sets and alternative DB connections are independent. They are not working together. You need to make sure that when you do set it up, okay, that you configure the sequences correctly. They do not follow the source database. You need to make sure that when you do that, that you actually properly manage it from your side. Okay. When a replication transitions, it auto reconnects to the right databases with the source and the target PFs that you specify in the property files. It will know how to start up that database in the right mode. With the auto reconnect, if your session was running and your database goes down, it will then try and reconnect to the alternate ones. But if that database crashed, the primary database, and you then go and try and connect, it won't start up, can't connect, and then move on. It needs to create the connection to the first primary one And only when it's established connection and it crashes, will it move on. If you try to connect to a database that's down using this, it literally just tells you the -DB connection is not possible. It doesn't automatically move on to the alt DBs in that connection as well. So you do need to manage your Connect PO for your clients as well, independently when you do transitioning or if the DBs goes down. It's a feature that helps when you're online and you want to quickly just move on. But the next step is to actually do some configuration parameter updates to make sure any future new connections do get the right connection as well. Okay, so that's also one thing I hope Progress will actually look at, to saying is that if I have a list of 3 DBs to connect and the first one's not available, don't just fail, at least move on. Where currently they do require you to at least have established the connection on the first one, and only at a failure does they start moving on. Okay. So if you want to use these options to accomplish high availability, you need to make sure, like I said, the sequencing is correct regarding replication, as well as where you get into your database alternative connections. And trying to align the timeouts, make sure how long your transition is going to take, and make sure that your timeouts in your database connects and stuff do align for that as well. Okay. Like I said, we've only had one scenario where we really do that the replication sets in that scenario. But for us, generally the replication on 2 databases is more than enough that you need. It's only when you really get to the big customers who needs the replication sets. But this is some of the complexities you need to keep in mind when you get there. Okay. During a failure, both should move on, but like I said, as long as you make sure you align and you're aware what it is. For clients, I would rather anyway say, when it happens, rather exit your session, update your connection PF to the right one, and then restart your session. Okay. Let replication do what it's meant to do, to keep your data up and running 24/7 as it can, but your client connections, I would rather say, do manage it yourself. Okay, and then, yeah, this is just the list of all the things you need to consider. I don't know what all connections you guys have into your systems. We're looking at our pairs, our GUI, and the QUI character user interfaces, making sure that all those connection strings you have, where you're running shared memory or client connections, what the impact of each of those are. Okay, the database, you're going to make sure you get the replication that get it up and running, but you need to make sure in those connections. SQL, like I said, our preference is we offload it to the DR server. I don't like a third-party SQLs, any APIs or REST calls into my live site. That's what the target database is, especially for querying. The exceptions is where you have updates, and those REST and APIs on the update side, you'll allow in your source. But you need to make sure that when you do replication, that you consider how does those work. And make sure that as far as possible, everything is setting up on DNS or floating IP scenarios, that you never actually have to go and manually go and fix up all those connections as well. You can literally transition your databases, update your DNS records, and everything will work. Okay, your downtime is minimal in that regards. Okay, so to achieve high availability and connecting to your database, and here, as you understand, the correct database, the active database, as well as the updatable database, because you've got the advanced read-only. It's still an active database, but it's not updatable. So with this, you can choose which database you want to access. It's there for high availability, but it also spreading your load. And you just need to make sure that when you set up this scenario for yourself, you understand which DBs you're connecting to and the function of each of the database. It has its own challenges, but the simple answer I can give you is replication, replication, replication. Go and make sure that you invest in getting a replication up and running. Okay, it's a very simple process to do. The benefits totally outweighs the cost. Okay, it is, instead of working 2 or 3 days to try and sometimes get stuff up and running, you're talking about 2 or 3 hours from A to Z to get everything from the transition, making sure the double checks, the check balances are done. It's really, really worthwhile. Okay, and you need to just manage your own application connections separately from the database side and understand how those are impacted. The alternate DB connections is a great step forward, but there's still a few things lacking, and hopefully Progress will do and help us get those things resolved. Okay, it's at least you're one step closer to actually getting high availability up and running. But the replication is the actual road to go. Come. That's me. Any comments, questions? Yes.
You said you are running different data centers, correct?
Yes.
What happens if your data center A doesn't see data center B anymore because, I don't know, the class fiber or something like this get cutted, and then the master is a source database and data center A is not seeing the database in database B, but B is not seeing A, so this gets an automatically master and this is still master. What happens if the reconnect then happens?
That's why I said in the beginning, the tier 7 is where you allow those databases to auto-switch. We stay on the manual transitioning, and I can actually show in the one slide here. Where was that? So check on our transitioning here. We set to manual. We don't allow that because you can just get a fiber switch that goes down. Now you get both. The only way to get out of that is actually you need to decide which one is master and you have to rebuild the other slave. Okay? And the problem is some connection or some data updates could have happened to both. And that's why our main decision is we don't go, and that's where I say tier 7 is coming in, where this is set to auto. And we prefer to saying is if anything goes down, I will get an email, a SMS, a WhatsApp saying as the connection is down, what do you want to do? And I will go and quickly investigate, and we will then at that point decide, will it be restored in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or an hour? And what is the call? Do we right now transition and say, okay, now that becomes new master, we shut down the other one? Or is the other one not totally available? So we'll make the decision manually, and then we can do that transition. Like I says, worst case scenario, the quickest we do that's about 2 minutes, but let's say you work on a general thing of 15 minutes. That processing to make sure that you don't break or get your two databases out of sync, it's sometimes not worthwhile. Especially from Africa, I won't say we've got bad internet or bad lines, but you see sometimes someone just pulls somewhere a cable. Okay, and it's even in an office. The guy's quickly working there and the switch just goes down and he quickly just replugs it back in. You don't want for that second to switch your systems, the amount of effort. So hopefully, and with the replication, once it establishes and connects, okay, both agents will sit and retry. Okay, there's also timeouts on that. So especially the target will sit and wait indefinitely. On the source one, all you have to do is restart the agent, it's online, restart it and it will start catching up. So all the data is going still into the AI files, and it's still collecting locally. As long as your AI setup and space is adequate, you can be offline for 7 days. Okay, and you can then, once you just get the line up and running, you're just getting replication running again. We've had some scenarios, if I go to this picture, yeah, where at a point where customer were down and for actual 7 days, but because we still had backups, so we do a weekly full backup and the rest of the week we do incremental backups, okay? And at that point we just did incremental backups every 12 hours, but AI files were still being generated. So at any point, and all the AI files were being backed up as well. So we were literally at that point, and I think about 5 minutes at risk. All of these files were connecting. The line was down, okay? And that database was, in theory, still a point of time. But as soon as the line came up, all the AI, all the information was here, and it just started streaming again, okay? And within 2 hours, it actually caught up everything. So it's not always required to transition. But having all of this in place, we said we can allow that line to be down, because the replication will catch up once we have it. But we've got enough backup solutions and recovery scenarios in place, and making sure it all goes off-site vaulted as well. Okay, so as long as you have that in place, you can still make that manual choice. And that's why I prefer never to look at the auto option. Okay.
How many AI files have you defined on the databases?
How many AI files? It depends from system to system, database, customer. We normally try and say simply, we take about 10% quickly, and we prefer to work in fixed AI extents. I know some people say, okay, it's variable, great, but I can get one AI that goes and grows to 100 gigs. The next AI can grow to 1 terabyte, the next one to 200. We rather say, okay, let's set up 2 gig or 20 gig AIs and I set 10 or 20 of them up. I've got that sets, And I can also use it, and with those sets, I can then do time-based to saying is either when it's full or within every 5 or 10 minutes, I switch. And it then archives it, we copy it off, and it actually replicates to our backup vaults as well. So we rather do that because I say I can allocate, let's say, 200 gigs or 2 terabyte for AI, depending on what you have. But it's a fixed size. I'm never going to run out of disk space. I'm never going to get that anomalies where those things are growing. I rather monitor of my AI extents. I can say my AI extent is currently 30% full or 40% full. I've got a proper measurement of my AI, knowing that if I add up all my AI extents, it's fixed extents, that's 100%. And based on, and with the queries of the AI, you see the numbers and values it gives you. You can actually then, based on what your percentage growth of your AI is, and at a certain point you can say, okay, the line is now down, we're sitting at 80%. Are we actually going to break replication, or what's the next steps? Are we going to be up and running? So for us, it's a much more controlled, sticking to fixed AI extents. But yeah, generally we start off with about 10%. Some systems we have added more, and some we've actually got about 5%. But it purely depends on what you actually do store in there.
When the replication is broken or you will not the AI files.
Yes, yeah. So the nice thing with AI files is if you get it broken up, okay, and your AI files, let's say you've got AI 1 to 10. If you haven't gone to 10 and looped into the 1, okay, if you still got 10 available itself, you can always add more online easily. And that's what we normally, first thing we go and check to saying is, let's see how long we're going to down. And if I need to add AI, I at least know I've always got extra disk space because my AI is a fixed size, but I can go and add, okay, extra 10 or 20 gig AIs easily. Especially if I haven't looped past the last number in that where it's full. Because normally the AI anyway, when the replication's running, those AI anyway empties and saves out immediately and frees up that AI extend again. It's only when it's down that it actually needs to wait before it empties. But yeah, we've had a few scenarios where we actually even tripled the AI extend for the period while they were getting the lines up and running. It didn't impact the system, okay? Therefore, we didn't have to switch to the DR site. It was purely the line between live and DR that was down. So why must I switch to the DR server just because the line went down? The application is fully accessible, running, no impact on users. It's my high availability is slightly at risk, but because I've got a secondary scenarios in place, I'm not too dependent on that really for my 24/7. Okay, live is still running. I've got backups and multiple copies of it available to roll forward if I need to, if anything else happens, and just getting that as one of my main options back up and running. Okay. Yes?
Is it possible to do a transition without shutting down the database and bringing it up again? So
sorry, there?
Is it possible to do a transition?
Yes.
Without shutting down the database and bringing it up so that you have really zero downtime?
No, so that's the one thing it's not. The transition is literally, it's an online process right now, but the databases itself does the auto sync and then it does do a shutdown and bring up, but it is that few seconds that you are down. Okay, but yeah, there's unfortunately not exact real-time one yet, but like I said, you can, depending on the size of the DB and how many AI blocks it quickly needs to realign and sync. That's what I'm saying. Our general term is 2 minutes. From when we go and check everything's happy, we do it and we...
Yeah, but I have a customer where even 2 minutes is too
long.
And not for disaster recovery, but if you have a disaster, okay, it's okay to have downtime, but they want to use it for maintenance purposes.
Yeah.
And that they don't want any downtime.
Yeah. So like I said, we down to, I would say 2 minutes is the general term, but always when you talk to management, you at least say 15 minutes, half an hour. They always need to have the bigger. And 2 minutes is literally the command, but then you do need to do your check and balances before and afterwards. So it does it, in that regard, your task is longer, but the actual applications that you're doing file over, it does all of the things syncs. I mean, some of my test environments, it does it in 10 seconds. But it depends on the resources, the database shutting down, all of this. Okay. If you have pairs and other things that you want to quickly anyway reconnect, some of those, once it actually transitions, that agent will disconnect and it will just reconnect as well back onto it because the database comes up quick enough. But because it's now advanced read-only, is that PAS still write to it, or do you need to switch the DNS anyway to get there? Okay. So the biggest issue normally in this is getting your DNS and those connections to switch, and those things sometimes take more time to propagate than it is takes for us to change. Okay. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no real online switch at this stage. Okay. Which version? We are primarily at this stage on 12.2. We're busy with 12.8, and we're in the last steps of decommissioning all 11.7. Our goal is by December we'll be off 11.7, and with the 12.8 that we've done the first 2 or 3 beta sites, part of our next patching, literally instead of going from the 12 to 18, we're going to go straight to 12.8.4, 12.8.5. So on our 12 level, we've made sure that it's actually 12 is 12. We're just going to straight switch from 12.2 to 12.8. So we're just finalizing our last beta sites on the 12.8 testing. But they were very minute things that we had to look at. And the biggest things with 12.8 was the fact that there's so much more restricted compiler information and stuff that you normally got away with, now it's telling you this isn't right. So we actually cleaning up, and that still benefits on 12.2, it still works as well. But it's actually just helping you to sort of be a bit more on your code, very stricter, and making sure it works the way it's supposed to. But we're trying to keep up on the latest.
So have you had any challenges with the replication set?
Sorry?
Have you had any challenges with the replication set, introducing that?
No, the replication set works perfect. It's once you want to start getting your connections and things and managing that. And customers are always quick to say, let's put two or three different servers with your PAS agents, and all of them can connect in. But now just saying is when you then replicate, you need to make sure all of these third-party components and the load balancing and whatever they implement, that it's aware also to switch and to get those things to follow the source database.
You have to put up
But replication sets, like I said, for us, it's literally there's one customer switch every 6 months, and the other one uses it actually specifically with replication set as their reporting DB. And they also transition between the data centers at intervals. It's not a fixed structure, but they do it as part of a DR exercise. And then they run in that data center for like 2-3 weeks, and then they bring it back to the main data center. But the reporting one just sits there. And it's a very simple setup that you do. It's the same as we do normal replication. It's purely coming down to your infrastructure you need to put in place. Okay. And the biggest thing is disk, and disk is the cheapest. So you can easily put that. Your replicated, your target service doesn't need to have the same power. It can be half the power or quarter of the power. Less CPU, less memory. As long as the service just all performs. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Just a comment. From a licensing perspective, Progress has 2 different products, Replication and Replication Plus.
Okay.
Replication is cheaper, but I always try to sell Replication Plus to customers because that's what allows a read-only connection.
Okay.
Replication only, you can't connect to the target.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So there is 2 separate replication licenses. We part of the SaaS model, so we've got the licenses included. So I'm not always too clued up on those, but I know there is the replication is at a cost, and that's normally where some customers do have to weigh it up. And that's what I said earlier. Please at least get the backup and the AI and those components. That's standard available. But once you get to the replication, then you can start doing the one, and the replication set, you get all the advanced read-only. The replication set, all the benefits of it. And it's really worthwhile, the cost for that. Okay. Yes.
In the replication sets, will both of the targets be available as read-only, or is only one of them?
Both. Both are fully available for you to do read-only queries on. Okay.
And is there somewhere to check, somehow I can, by code, check if this particular database I'm connected to, is it available as read-only or read-write? Do you understand what I mean?
Well, so I don't know if there's in the VSTs on that. I know with the standard Progress commands, you can actually check the database describe. It will tell you the information. I'm not 100% sure if there's VST.
You can tell in the VSTs. I don't know very often.
No. Yeah, actually, there is one of the VSTs now that you mentioned. There's one of the VSTs, I don't know which one, but there is a VST that you can go and check that get pulled in. But otherwise, yeah, part of the database describe as well, you can actually see that as well. But
I was more interested in if there's somewhere I can, in my code.
Yes, yeah. I mean, so from our application as well, we've created a startup wrapper. Thank you. Startup wrapper, and that wrapper only connects to the DBs. Our direct connect to the DB doesn't happen in the initial startup script. We actually have a program, and then part of that is also where we do some checks on what we want to do, and based on that, we actually only connect to the DBs. And even with that, we can have a list of 5 DBs we want to connect to, but only 3 is mandatory to initially connect, and the others will only optionally connect as services when those additional services get started up. So we've even built that in. Okay, but yeah, there should be a VST that actually tells you the database status. Okay. Okay, any questions? No questions? Thank you, really appreciate it. Okay.